Welcome back to part two of session one, if you can keep track of that. The subject is sports. And right now what I want to do is get into the London 2012 Olympics and some specific examples relating to sponsorship. Here's a slide of the opening ceremonies taking place in London 2012. And here's a list of who the partners were that were involved with the Olympics in London 2012. There were 11 worldwide partners. Now you'll note that 6 of those were from the United States, and that's been an area where a lot of the sponsors with the Olympic movement have been based out of. There were 7 local partners that the London Organizing Committee secured, and then there were 7 London supporters and 28 providers and suppliers. So all in all, the London 2012 Olympics was able to go to the games, with 53 sponsors who held varying rights that allowed them to be engaged with this massive event that was seen all over the world. I know from Beijing that we thought the estimates were that possibly as many as 4 billion people on Earth saw some part of the Olympic Games or read about them or were connected to the Olympics. That's 2/3 of the globe's population connecting with the Olympics. And we don't believe there's really any other event out there really in the world that could cause 2/3 of the world's population to be connected. Now, going back to sponsorship, given the significant amounts of money that each of those sponsors was paying, either to the IOC, which is based in Lausanne, Switzerland, or to what was then the London Organizing Committee, it was imperative that each of those sponsors integrated their investment both externally to their customers, but also possibly internally to their employees or to their business vendors. So when we think about the power of sponsorship, and we go back to that material that I said we might use if there were a quiz, we're talking about creating that mutual exploitation. We're trying to make sure we really leverage, and there's a key word for you, we really leverage our investment in this sponsorship. We want to make sure that if I'm going to spend, let's say, $100 million to be an official sponsor of the Olympics, that all of my customers are going to know that I'm a sponsor, but also equally that my employees, my vendors, the organizations that I do business with, business-to-business concepts, are also going to know that. So we also need to recognize that sponsors may purchase an Olympic sponsorship to maybe target a specific objective that they want to accomplish. So they may spend that money to be officially involved with the Olympics, but not maybe put it in any advertising that most of us would see on TV or online. Instead, they might want to bring key decision makers to the games and then host them and provide lavish hospitality in order to get just one business deal done. I know General Electric, when they had become the sponsor for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, you didn't really see General Electric advertising in kind of mass media type settings. But what they were doing in China was they were making sure that their jet engines and their turbos and things that were used with dams were actually being purchased by Chinese businesses. And for General Electric, the Olympics were hugely successful, although the average consumer might not have known that General Electric was involved with the games. Now, every aspect of a corporation's business must really understand the power of something like the Olympics or the World Cup, and it's got to really be integrated across the entire organization for the company to get its money's worth out of that investment. So a little bit more about London 2012. There was an interesting piece that a lot of those sponsors had to deal with, and that was the possibility that they would be ambushed. So as a sponsorship concept, let me talk for just a moment about the concept of ambush. It's kind of an interesting one, which is, let's just say that Visa spends hundreds of millions of dollars to be the official sponsor of the London 2012 Olympics. Well, they want everyone in London to be using a Visa card, and they want all the retailers to be causing people maybe to buy things with their Visa cards. But what about American Express or MasterCard or the Diners card? There are a lot of other ways that people want to charge for purchases that they're going to make. Now, Visa wants everyone who comes to London to know that they're the official sponsor of London 2012, but MasterCard just can't roll over and die. American Express can't say, well, we're not going to do anything in London for the next 2 years if this were going back to 2012. So American Express, MasterCard, they had to figure out what their marketing plans were and what kind of activities they were going to use to make sure that their customers didn't forget that your MasterCard will also be accepted. So they might have started to consider doing things that could possibly, and here's that word ambush, cause people to actually think that MasterCard was an official sponsor of the Olympics. So there's some issues that we would cover if we were going to spend more time together, but I want to make sure that you hear that concept, which is that Company A may buy the exclusive or the official sponsorship, but Company B still has to do business, and they may actually do things that kind of ambush the perception that someone else is the exclusive sponsor and give off an impression that they're a sponsor. An example could be that MasterCard, and I'm not going to say that they did this, but MasterCard could have had an advertisement or paper in stores that said, "Welcome sports fans." They haven't used any illegal rights, trademark privileges that were granted to Visa, but they did actually maybe give off the impression that they were associated with the games. In general, though, the collected wisdom of sponsors is that nothing matches the power of the Olympics or the FIFA World Cup in terms of being able to create the strongest attributes for your brand. And so it's no surprise that brands like Visa and Coca-Cola and McDonald's, probably familiar to most of you, used imagery drawn from the Olympics, which can be thought of as things like winning, courage, performance, reliability. All of those phrases may be things that cause a brand to actually feel like if those things are associated with my brand, I'm getting the best brand attributes that we could associate with the Olympics, and they're going to probably blur over onto my brand. So, London 2012, let's wrap up there and say, how could sponsors have maximized their investment in the Olympics, and how could they have measured it? Well, one way is they could have measured it by sales. Did our sales trends go up for having been an official sponsor of the Olympics? The brand may have wanted to gain market share, and the cost of a market share point, if all the brands that compete in a segment add up to 100 share points, the value of a share point, what's called market share, could be very powerful for those brands to have moved, let's say, from a 30 share of the market to maybe a 32, because a market share point might be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They might have also seen trends that they really liked in their advertising. More people were talking about their ads. Maybe if they ran a blog, maybe there are people tweeting about their brands. Where I live right now, I listen to a radio show while I drive to work in the morning, and one of the radio hosts was talking about an ad he saw on TV, and somebody had tweeted about it, and he followed that person on Twitter, and because of that, he was now talking about that brand's advertising, and people were tweeting about it. People may also be going to Facebook or MySpace, to brands like that, and talking about the things that they find interesting or amusing. A company could have also, in its sponsorship leverage, might have used it to retain existing employees or maybe to recruit new employees. Companies are always looking for reasons to cause someone to want to work at their organization. It could have been that they used an orientation in their on-product representation. In other words, they might have put a logo on the side of their product, maybe on their can or their bottle or on the container that held their product, that said, "We're an official sponsor." Now, it's a form of advertising or maybe a form of merchandising, but it really causes the consumer to say, hey, this brand is special, and there's some real power in that. And then finally, and we talked about it a little bit before, at retail, there's a real opportunity for an organization that's an official sponsor to put signage up at the place that you actually buy the product. So that if you go into a store maybe to buy beer, maybe you're going to see a big display that says we are the official sponsor of the Olympics or the National Football League or the Serie A or La Liga. So we have different ways that we can tell our customers, there are distribution channels, that we're an official sponsor. So many sponsors, and the phrase that a lot of organizations use, are rights holders, are very familiar with buying signage and executing hospitality contracts. But one of the things that we've found over the last few years is the concept of what were their objectives going in. And so some of you will have heard of the phrase return on investment. So if I spent $10 to maybe buy something, was I going to be able to get $12 back, right? That would have been a possible way for me to measure a return on my investment. But another way, not ROI, but ROO, is a return on objectives. So what were my goals going in being a sponsor of the Olympics or of the World Cup? And did I meet them? Okay. Was it to gain share points? Was it to increase profitability? Was it to increase the number of people who were familiar with my brand? And so a lot of what's going on in the sports sponsorship world right now is trying to pre-measure where we are and then post-measure. So we know what our numbers were before, then we actually are involved as a sponsor of the event, and we know what our post numbers are. And that allows us to actually see whether or not our sponsorship caused us to meet our return on objectives. It's an interesting concept, and I think for a lot of us, even in our personal lives, for the things that you're hoping to achieve as a student or as an employee of a company, is when you look at yourself in the future, how do you see your own personal growth and what are your own objectives? So I think there's something we can take out of today's class that you may be able to apply specifically to yourself to say, well, I'm doing this job right now, but 10 years from now, I might like to be, and it could be higher up the channel in my current company, or it could be that you want to be at a different company. And you might say, well, how do I measure myself? Well, understand that companies do that all the time with themselves and with their investments. Now, the other thing is that some sponsor executives may only have been thinking about the event itself, going to the Olympics, and not really about how to think about sponsorship over the course of an entire year. Many of the sponsors that were involved with London 2012 were actually involved in a run-up to the games, and then they actually had an entire period after the games ended that they wanted there to be kind of a halo effect for their brand before they moved on to the next sponsorship activity that they might be involved with. And it's why the biggest sponsor brands are actually involved not just with single sporting events, but in a lot of cases with multiple sporting events, some of them at the local level, national, and even the international level, and they want them kind of in a constant flow to match up with their advertising. So here's some implications maybe as we think about going forward into Sochi 2014. And here's an interesting statistic for you. The Russian government and the people that are putting on the Sochi Games have already spent $50 billion US to get those games ready for next year. They are already the most expensive Olympics ever to have been staged, and they haven't even happened yet. Now, if we go back to Beijing, it was thought that the Chinese spent about $42 billion to stage those games. London did them much cheaper than that, cost only the London Organizing Committee about $20 billion, almost half of what China had spent. But now jumping forward to Sochi, the Russians have spent at least $50 billion getting that city ready, and they're probably likely to go across $60 billion. That's a massive amount of money that's being spent to build the facilities and the infrastructure to host these games. Brazil is doing the same kind of thing because they've got the World Cup and the Olympics, and so you can understand there's a lot of money that's got to pour into these communities, and sponsorship is going to be a big part of it. At the end of the day, all of those organizations, the broadcast mediums that cover the games, the sponsors, the advertisers, they've got to ask the question, did our involvement with this sporting event, in this case the Olympics, did it move the needle? Did it cause us to grow our brand, to have more viewers? Did it cause our city to be more friendly for tourists? Did it cause people around the world to think differently about our country? And it's an interesting thing for Russia at a time when its economics are exploding in a positive way as to wanting people to see Russia maybe in a new light, different from how it might have been seen 20 or 30 years ago. China certainly used the Beijing Olympics as a coming out party to say this is the new China. So there are a number of implications when we think about the power of sports events and whether or not they're actually going to cause people to think differently and behave differently, to enter into, back to our original statement about marketing, to enter into different exchanges, compelling exchanges. And I think that that's actually kind of an interesting thought for me to leave you with for today's class. So let's set this up that we have the ability for you to ask questions. We're still hopeful that we can get a lot of feedback back to you. Obviously, if there's 1,000 of you that are maybe taking this class, it's not going to be possible to answer everyone's question. But what I'm hoping to do is kind of look at all the questions that come in and see if we see some of the same topics being raised. When we come back for the next class, what I'll do is I'll start that off by saying, hey, here were a couple of questions from our last segment that were of interest or a concern to you, and I want to make sure that we answer those. So thanks for being with me today. It's been great kind of having you in this class setting. It's really exciting to imagine that we're doing this maybe all over the world, that there's someone in Australia or someone in Belgium or maybe in Africa that's watching this, and that we're having an opportunity to talk about a topic that I hope you find interesting and enjoyable. I'm Rick Burton. I'm the David Falk Professor of Sport Management at Syracuse University, and it's been a real pleasure being with you today for this class.